I always thought if something important in my life was taken from me, I would hear about it in a clear and honest way. A phone call, a tense family meeting, maybe even an argument that started small and grew loud. But that is not how I learned the truth. I learned it in silence in the middle of my childhood home, with my bag still on my shoulder and dust still on my boots, staring at an empty space that felt louder than any shouting ever could. I found. Outstanding in the living room, looking at a glass display case that had been part of the house for as long as I could remember. It stood against the far wall, in the same spot it had always been, like a quiet guard watching over the room. Only now it was hollow, clean, too clean. And through the front window, parked in the driveway like a prize nobody had earned, my younger sister's brand new Tesla shone in the sunlight, black and perfect, reflecting the sky like it had nothing to hide. When my grandmother finally learned what they had done, how they had sold the one thing my grandfather left just for me, she did not shout, she did not tremble, she did not shed a single tear. She only smiled, but I did not know any of that yet. I knew something was wrong the moment I walked through the front door. A house tells you when it has been touched without permission. The air feels thinner, sounds bounce in strange ways. Even the smell changes, less like old wood and furniture polish, more like sharp cleaner, as if someone had tried to scrub away a memory. I had just come home on leave. Not the happy kind with banners and photos and food waiting on the table, just a short break between rotations. A few days to sleep in a real bed. A few days to remember what quiet sounded like when it was not broken by boots, radios, or distant thunder. My duffel bag was still hanging from my shoulder when I noticed it. The display case empty. The glass was spotless. No fingerprints. No dust shadows where objects had rested for decades. No faint marks of history. Just blank space. My chest tightened fast and hard, the way it does right before something terrible happens. The same tightness I had felt once overseas. Seconds before an explosion rewrote the sound of my own breathing forever. I stepped closer. The medals were gone. Each one my grandfather had mounted carefully, labeled in his steady handwriting. The ceremonial dagger was gone, the one he received when he became a general. Its leather handle worn smooth not by use, but by time and pride. The folded flag was gone. He had placed it there himself, and never allowed anyone to touch it again, and most of all the letter was gone. The one he had written to me. The one tucked behind the frame, addressed in ink that had faded but never weakened. I set my bag down slowly, as if sudden movement might break something already cracked inside me. "Mom?" I called. No answer. Instead, I heard laughter outside. My sister's laugh, light, carefree. I turned toward the window. That was when I saw the car properly. The Tesla sat in the driveway like a polished promise, sunlight sliding across its surface as if it were alive. Temporary plates still on it. The inside untouched, expensive, perfect. My sister stood beside it, phone raised, moving her head, changing angles, chasing the right picture. She smiled like her happiness had not been built on someone else's past. For a moment, my mind refused to connect what my eyes already understood. Then it did. And the calm the military had trained into me settled deep in my bones. The stillness that keeps panic quiet. The kind that lets you move forward even when everything inside you wants to collapse. I walked outside. She noticed me then. Her smile flickered just a little. "Oh," she said, "you're home." I nodded. "Where's Grandpa's display?" She blinked. "What?" "The case," I said. "Inside." She shrugged. "Ask Mom." That answer told me enough. Inside, I found my parents in the kitchen. My mother stirred her coffee like nothing in the world had shifted. My father sat at the table scrolling on his tablet, calm in the way only people who believe they cannot be touched ever are. I did not sit. "Where is it?" I asked. My mother sighed before I finished speaking. "Can you at least say hello?" I looked at my father. "Where's Grandpa's keepsake?" He did not look up. "We took care of it." Those 4 words hit harder than any shout. Took care of it how? My mother set the spoon down. "You're being dramatic." "You sold it," I said. Silence. My father finally looked up.
Yes, the word landed flat, heavy, final. You sold everything, I said. The medals, the dagger, the letter.
It was valuable, my mother said quickly. And it was just sitting there. It was his, I said. And he left it to me. My sister walked in, keys swinging in her hand. It's not like you were using it, she said. You're never here. That's because I'm serving, I said. She rolled her eyes. You get paid for that. My hands clenched. My father cleared his throat. We're family. What he left belongs to all of us. No, I said quietly. He was clear. My mother's face hardened. He didn't need it anymore. Something inside me split open. You didn't think to tell me? I asked. We didn't want to burden you, my father said. You didn't want me to stop you. My mother pointed toward the window. Your sister needed a safe car. I laughed once, short, bitter. So you bought her a Tesla. My sister smiled. It's beautiful. I looked back at the empty wall, and I understood. They hadn't sold metal or glass or paper. They had sold proof. Proof that someone in this family had believed in me. I picked up my bag. Don't tell your grandmother, my mother said. She doesn't need stress. She deserves the truth, I said, And for the first time, they were afraid. The next morning, I drove to her place before the heat settled over the streets. Early light has no mercy. It shows everything. Her building stood at the end of a quiet road lined with old trees. I rode the elevator alone. She was sitting by the window when I knocked. You look like your grandfather did, she said, when someone crossed a line.
They
sold it, I said. She waited. All of it. For almost 90,000. She breathed in slowly. And what did they buy? A Tesla. That was when she smiled. Not happy. Not bitter. Knowing. Double quotes that explains the hurry. She said, I told her everything. She listened. Then she brought out a folder. Inside were photos. Appraisals, insurance papers, and his will. My name. They had no. Right, I said. They did not. She answered. A strange mix of relief and grief washed through me. And she smiled again, gently, and said very softly, that keepsake. Relief that I hadn't imagined his intention. Grief that the people who raised me had ignored it so easily. They moved fast, she went on. That tells me they knew now to worry. I thought of the spotless glass case, the missing dust, the Tesla tag still dangling. What happens now? I asked. She closed the folder and slid it back into the cabinet. Now, she said, we let them believe they've won. My pulse skipped. That's it for the moment. She picked up her phone, already scrolling. I'll need the buyer's information. I don't have it. She smiled again. We will. I watched her type, fingers steady despite their age. You're very calm about this. She glanced up. Your grandfather always said the most dangerous officer in the room is the one who doesn't raise his voice. She made a call, then spoke quietly, efficiently. No names I recognized, no explanations she didn't need to give. When she hung up, she looked at me and said, I'll handle this. I felt a flicker of guilt. I didn't want you dragged into family drama. She laughed softly. Family drama dragged me into this when they sold something that wasn't theirs. We sat in silence for a moment, the kind that doesn't beg to be filled. Outside, a nurse passed by with a cart. Somewhere down the hall, a television murmured. What do I do? I asked finally. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You go back to your life. You do your job. You don't argue, you don't explain, and you don't warn them. I nodded. As I stood to leave, she added almost gently, and when they invite you over to celebrate that car, you come. I paused at the door. Why? Her eyes held mine sharp and unwavering. Because she said, some lessons require witnesses. I left her apartment feeling like the ground had shifted under my feet. Not because I was losing something, but because I was about to see who in my family would survive the truth. Nothing happened right away. That was the hardest part. In the military, you're trained to expect cause and effect. You act, something responds. You move, the world adjusts. Even waiting has structure, timelines, checkpoints, updates that tell you whether you're still on course. This was different. Weeks passed and my family behaved like they'd gotten away with something permanent. I returned to base 2 days after seeing my grandmother. I slipped back into routine the way I always did. Muscle memory carrying me through mornings. That started before sunrise and ended long after the day had burned itself out. Boots, formations, paperwork, training runs that left my lungs raw and my thoughts too tired to wander until they weren't. At night, when the noise finally dropped away, I thought about the empty display case, about my grandfather's hands, large, steady, placing each medal just so not to show off but to remember. He'd never talked much about his career unless I asked specific questions. He believed stories earned their telling. And when had chosen me quietly, deliberately to receive those keepsakes, it hadn't felt like favoritism. It had felt like trust. Meanwhile, back home, my sister posted like she'd just unlocked a new level of life. The Tesla appeared on my phone screen more times than I could count. Daylight photos, nighttime photos, close-ups of the interior. Her hand on the wheel, nails perfectly done, captioned with things like, "Hard work pays a fan finally." My parents commented with heart emojis and congratulations. Not once did any of them mention my grandfather. I didn't comment. I didn't react. I didn't call. I followed my grandmother's instructions exactly. Silence, I was learning, was not the absence of action. It was a form of discipline. About 4 weeks in, my mother called. I let it ring. She texted instead. "We're having people over this weekend. A little get-together. You should come." No apology, no acknowledgement, just an invitation wrapped in normally. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "I'll be there." I didn't add anything else. The call from my grandmother came the next morning. "They've planned a party," she said, as if discussing the weather. "Yes, they think it's about the car." I know. There was a pause. "Then I've invited a few people as well." I smiled for the first time in days. "Friends of yours?" "Of sorts," she said. "Bring your uniform." The drive home that weekend felt heavier than the first one had. Not because I was anxious, because I wasn't. Anxiety requires uncertainty. This felt like standing at the edge of a controlled demolition, watching professionals set charges with careful hands. My parents' house looked different when I pulled up. Not physically, emotionally. Cars lined the street. Laughter drifted from the backyard. Music played too loud. The kind of cheerful noise meant to announce success to anyone within earshot. And there it was. The Tesla sat in the driveway, washed to a shine so bright it almost hurt to look at. A ribbon had been tied around one of the side mirrors, red and ridiculous. I stood there for a moment, keys still in my hand. I thought about me grandfather's funeral. The way the folded flag had been placed into my grandmother's arms. The way she'd thanked the officer, voice steady even as her hands shook. Then I squared my shoulders and walked in. The backyard had been transformed into something out of a catalog. String lights, a grill going full blast. Neighbors I barely recognized, holding drinks like they'd been invited to a victory lap. My sister spotted me first. She glanced at my uniform and smirked. "You really wore that?" "Yes," I said. She laughed. "Relax, Dot, it's just a party." My parents joined us moments later. My mother hugged me stiffly, careful not to wrinkle anything. My father clapped me on the shoulder like he always did, proud of the image, if not the substance. "We're glad you could make it," my mother said. "We didn't know if you'd be free." I looked past her at the car. Seems important. My sister beamed. "Isn't it?" People gathered. Compliments flowed. Someone asked about my job, then lost interest halfway through the answer. Another asked my sister about the curse fetchers. She rattled them off with rehearsed enthusiasm. I stayed quiet. Then the gate opened. I heard it before I saw it. The subtle shift in conversation, the way laughter stuttered and thinned. I turned. My grandmother walked in wearing a pale blouse and dark slacks, posture straight, expression calm. Beside her was a man in a tailored suit carrying a slim leather folder. Behind them came another woman I recognized vaguely from old photographs, a family friend from my grandfather's career days. My mother's face drained of color. "Mom," she said quickly, stepping forward. "You should have told us you were coming." My grandmother smiled pleasantly. I was invited. She looked at me then, and something unspoken passed between us. A quiet acknowledgement. My father cleared his throat. What's this about? My grandmother gestured around the yard. A celebration apparently. The man beside her stepped forward slightly but didn't speak. People shifted uncomfortably. Drinks lowered. Conversation stalled mid-sentence. My sister frowned. Grandma, this isn't the time. Oh, my grandmother said gently, it's exactly the time. She turned to the man with folder and nodded. And just like that, the party stopped being a party. No one announced that the party was over. It just stopped breathing. The music kept playing for a few seconds too long, cheerful and misplaced, until someone finally reached for the speaker and turned it down. Conversations dissolved into fragments. A laugh escaped somewhere near the grill and died immediately like it had embarrassed itself. My grandmother didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand attention. She simply stood there, hands folded loosely in front of her, and waited. People gave it to her. My mother recovered first ordery too. She smiled too widely and stepped closer, placing herself between my grandmother and the small crowd as if she could physically block whatever was coming. Mom, she said, her tone tight. Let's go inside, it's noisy out here. My grandmother tilted her head. I won't be long. My father glanced around, suddenly aware of the audience. This isn't appropriate. That's an interesting word, my grandmother replied. Considering the circumstances. My sister crossed her arms. Grandma, you're making this awkward. My grandmother looked at her for the first time. Really looked at her. Not unkindly, not warmly either, just clearly. Awkward? She repeated. Is that what you think this is? The man beside her, her lawyer, opened the folder. The sound of paper sliding free was quiet, but it carried. It always does when people know what documents mean. I won't read everything aloud, my grandmother said, turning slightly, so her voice carried without shouting. But I will say this much. She paused just long enough for my parents to feel it. The military keepsake your father left behind was not a family heirloom in the way you've chosen to believe. My mother's lips parted. Mom, it was a specific bequest. My grandmother continued. Documented, appraised, insured, and placed into a trust with own clear beneficiary. She turned her head and looked directly at me, my granddaughter. I felt the attention shift instantly. Not sympathy, recognition. My father shook his head. That's not how we understood it. My grandmother smiled faintly. Understanding is not the same as ownership. The lawyer stepped forward, then his voice even and practiced. The items were sold without legal authority. The buyer has been notified that the sale is under dispute. My sister laughed nervously. This is insane, is it? My grandmother asked. My mother's hands trembled. We didn't know about any trust. That, my grandmother said calmly, was intentional. The words settled like dust. You planned this? My father asked, disbelief creeping in. I prepared. My grandmother corrected. Your father taught me to. She gestured toward the driveway, toward the Tesla. The funds from that sale were used to purchase a vehicle, she said, which means the vehicle is now part of the dispute. My sister's face went white. You can't take my car. My grandmother's gaze sharpened. It was never yours. The lawyer extended a single document toward my parents. Notice of intent, he said. You'll be receiving formal paperwork within the week. My father didn't take it. My mother did, and then dropped. It burned. This is cruel, she whispered. No, my grandmother said softly. This is consequence. I felt something steady settle into my spine then. Not triumph, not revenge. Alignment. I stepped forward, finally speaking loud enough for the group to hear. My grandfather didn't leave me that keepsake because I'm special, I said. He left it to me because he trusted me to protect what it stood for, my sister scoffed. You're never even here. I'm serving, I replied. And I didn't think that meant I had to guard my inheritance from my own family. Silence, somewhere behind us. A neighbor cleared his throat. Another glance at their watch. People were already planning exits. My grandmother turned it back to my parents. You sold something you did not own, she said. You benefited from it, and now you will undo that benefit. My father's voice cracked. You're choosing her over us. My grandmother didn't hesitate. I'm choosing what's right. That was when I realized something important. This wasn't about me versus them. It was about the moment my family lost the ability to pretend. My sister grabbed her keys from the table. This ice unbelievable. She stormed toward the driveway, stopping short when she reached the Tesla like she expected it to reassure her. It didn't. My mother looked around at the guests. I think we should wrap this up. People nodded too quickly. Drinks were abandoned. Goodbyes mumbled. The party dissolved into embarrassed movement. As the yard emptied, my grandmother turned to me. It's in motion now, she said quietly. I nodded. Thank you. She squeezed my hand once. You didn't ask me to do this.
No, I said. You chose to. She smiled. Exactly.
Behind us, my parents stood frozen in the wreckage of their own choices. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel responsible for fixing it. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They crept in one by in the way reality does when it's done, waiting for denial to catch up. 2 days after the party, my mother called me for the first time since I'd left the house. Not a text, not a carefully worded message she could revise before sending a call. That alone told me she was scared. I let it ring 3 times before answering. We need to talk, she said. Skipping. Hello, I'm at work. I replied. Is someone hurt? A pause. No, then it can wait. Her breath caught. They're saying we have to pay it back. I leaned against the cool metal railing outside the building, the morning air sharp in me lungs. Who is they? The buyer, she said. And some attorney he hired. He's furious. He says the sale wasn't clean. I closed my eyes. Of course it wasn't. They're threatening legal action, she continued. They want the full amount returned immediately. And I ask, and we don't have that kind of money just sitting around, she said, voice rising. We already spent it. I thought of the Tesla, of the ribbon, of my sister's smile. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it in the way you mean it. When something vital finally arrives, that sounds difficult. There was a sharp intake of breath. How can you say that? Because if this isn't happening to you, I replied evenly.
It's
happening because of you. She went quiet. They're talking a booth car, she said after a moment. Something about asset tracing. Yes, I said. That's how it works. She lowered her voice. Can you talk to your grandmother? I laughed softly. You should. She won't answer my calls, my mother whispered. I ended the conversation there. The next call came from my sister. She didn't bother pretending to be calm. This is your fault, she snapped the second I answered. You sicked her on us. I told truth, I said. That's all. They're saying the car might be taken, she said, panic bleeding through the anger. Do you know how humiliating that is? I pictured her parking it carefully, avoiding scratches. The way she'd circled it during the party like a prize animal. Yes, I said I do. You're enjoying this, she accused. No, I said quietly. I'm watching you learn. She hung up on me. 3 days later, the keepsake came home. It arrived in a reinforced case delivered by a courier who treated it like something fragile and irreplaceable, which it was. My grandmother insisted we open it together. She laid everything out on her dining table with the same care my grandfather once had. The metals caught the light first, then the dagger, its edge still pristine, and finally the letter. My hands shook when he unfolded it. If you're reading this, it began. It means you didn't flinch when it mattered. I swallowed hard. He'd written about service, about integrity, about how family isn't defined by blood alone, but by who respects what you've earned. My grandmother watched me quietly. When I finished, she reached out and covered my hand with hers. Henyu, she said, even before the rest of them showed us. The legal fallout escalated quickly after that. The buyer wanted his money back.
the funds.
Had to come from somewhere. My parents scrambled accounts, emptied favors, called in pride shredded. When it still wasn't enough, the car became leverage. The Tesla disappeared from the driveway in gray morning. No ribbon, no photos, just an empty space where my sister's certainty used to be. My father came by my grandmother's place unannounced that afternoon. He looked smaller than he remembered, older, like a man whose authority had finally been questioned and found lacking. "You didn't have to let it go this far," he said. My grandmother met his gaze. "You didn't have to steal from your own child." His mouth tightened. "She's not a child." "No," she said. "She's a soldier, and you treated her legacy like sparrowcage." He looked at me then. "You could have stopped this." I shook my head. "I didn't start it." He left without another word. The house I'd grown up in didn't belong to my parents anymore. Not in the way they'd assumed. Titles and trusts have a way of clarifying that. Plans were revised, permissions revoked, futures adjusted. My sister moved out within a month. My parents followed soon after. When the dust finally settled, the silence felt different. Earned. It mounted my grandfather's keepsake in my own space. Not to display it, but to live with it. A reminder that what we inherit isn't always meant to be shared. Sometimes it's meant to be protected. And that sometimes the strongest response isn't confrontation. It's letting the truth finish what it started. Once the noise faded, what remained was paperwork. That's the part people never talk about when the imaging justice. They picture shouting dramatic exits, maybe a slammed door or two. They don't picture emails with subject lines like formal demand or envelopes marked certified mail. They don't picture dates, signatures, deadlines. But that's where everything becomes real. My grandmother handled it all with the same calm precision she'd brought to the party. She didn't gloat. She didn't lecture. She reviewed documents at her kitchen table every morning. Glasses low on her nose pen. Moving steadily like this was just another task on a long, sensible list. I watched her one afternoon as she organized a stack of papers into neat piles. One for the buyer, one for the bank, one for my parents. She slid the last pile into a folder and closed it with finality. "They're going to be very tired soon," she said. I understood what she meant a week later. My mother showed up at my door without warning. Not my grandmother's door, mine. I opened it and barely recognized her. Her hair was pulled back hastily. Her eyes were rimmed red, not from crying. My mother rarely cried, but from exhaustion, the kind that seeps in when your usual tools stop working. "I just need a minute," she said already, stepping inside. I didn't stop her. She sat on the edge of my couch like she wasn't sure she deserved the space, her hands twisted together in her lap. "We're losing the house," she said. The words hung there bare and unadorned. I waited. "They say the repayment has to be made in full," she continued. "The accounts we used, they were flagged. Everything's frozen until it's resolved." I nodded slowly. That's what happens when money changes hands illegally. She flinched. "We didn't know." "You didn't ask," I replied. Her voice broke, then just slightly. "Your sister is blaming us." I almost smiled. Almost. "And Dad?" I asked. She looked down. "He's angry at everyone, mostly himself, I think." There it was, the part of the story I'd been waiting for. Regret. Not for what they'd done to me, not for ignoring my grandfather's wishes, but for miscalculating the cost. "You could owe your grandmother to stop," my mother said quietly. "She'd listen to you." I met her gaze. No, she wouldn't. And even if she did, I wouldn't ask. Her shoulders sagged. "I raised you better than this," she said weakly. I stood. "You raised me to respect what doesn't belong to me." She left without saying goodbye. The next casualty was my sister's certainty. She called me late one night, her voice unsteady in a way I'd never heard before. "They're taking everything," she said. "Do you know what that feels like?" "Yes," I answered. "I do." She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't think it would end like this." "I didn't think it would begin like that," I said. The call ended with no resolution, just the sound of two people realizing they'd never be on the same side of this. A month later, the house was empty. The one I'd grown up in, the one my grandfather had lived in, the one my parents had treated like a guarantee. My grandmother walked through it one last time with me. She ran her fingers along the banister, paused in the doorway of the living room, glanced at the blank space where the display case had once stood. "Funny," she said softly. "They cleared out everything but the truth." We locked the door behind us. That evening, back at her place, she handed me another folder. I updated the trust, she said. It's all protected now. No one can touch it without your consent. I opened it, scanning the pages. My name appeared more than once. I didn't ask for this, I said. She smiled gently. Your grandfather didn't ask to be honored either. He earned it. I thought about the months I'd spent believing I needed to stay small to keep the peace. About how often I'd swallow danger because it felt easier than conflict. I thought about the empty display case. And then I thought of Booth. Quiet weight of the metals now resting safely in my home. Some families survive by pretending. Mine survived by being exposed. And in that exposure, something unexpected happened. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. The first night I slept in my own place with my grandfather's keepsake displayed properly. I didn't turn on a single light. I let the room stay dim, lit only by the street lamp outside and the faint glow of the city settling into itself. The metals rested inside a simple frame on the wall, no glass glare, no spotlight. The ceremonial dagger lay beneath them, secured quiet, and Thelator, his letter, was folded back into its place, not hidden, just respected. For the first time since he died, I felt like I'd brought him home. I stood there longer than I meant. To boots off uniform jacket draped over a chair. The silence wasn't empty. It was full in a way I hadn't known I needed. No raised voices, no guilt disguised as concern. No expectation that I make myself smaller so everyone else could feel bigger. Just stillness. My grandmother came by the next afternoon. She moved slowly, carefully, but her eyes were sharp as ever. She studied the wall, nodded once, and said he would approve. That was all. We sat at my small kitchen table with mugs of tea that went cold while we talked about nothing urgent. The weather, a neighbor's dog, a book she'd started and put down because it bored her. Then eventually she said, "Your parents are asking around." I didn't look up. "About what?" "About you," she replied. "About whether you're angry." I thought about it. "I'm not," I said. "Honestly, I'm done." She smiled at that. Not the sharp smile from before, not the strategic one, a softer version. That's usually when people finally understand the damage they caused. "Do you think they will?" I asked. She considered it. "They'll understand Thelis. Whether they understand why is another matter." I nodded. That felt right. My sister sent one last message a week later. It was short. No blame, no apology either. I didn't know it wouldn't like this. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Neither did Grandpa, I typed. That's why he planned. She never answered. And strangely, I didn't feel the urge. Touches the silence this time. Life moved on. I went back to duty, back to early mornings and long days to orders given and followed to the strange comfort of structure. But something inside me had shifted. I stopped explaining myself to people who weren't listening. I stopped softening my words to make others comfortable. And I stopped believing that loyalty meant surrender. When I thought about my parents now, it wasn't with anger. It was with distance, the kind that lets you see a pattern clearly once you're no longer trapped inside it. They hadn't stolen from me because they hated me. They'd stolen because they believed I would endure it. They were right about my strength. They were wrong about my silence. One evening, months later, I received a small package in the mail. Number. Return address. Inside was a photograph I hadn't seen in years. My grandfather, much younger, in uniform, standing beside my grandmother, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Both of them looking straight at the camera, not smiling, not posing. Certain. I turned it over. On the back in my grandmother's handwriting were 4 words, "You did not flinch." I framed the photo and placed it beside the keepsake, not as a shrine, as a reminder. A reminder that honor doesn't belong to the loudest voice in the room. That family doesn't get to redefine your worth. And that sometimes the greatest act of revenge isn't destruction, it's preservation. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been told to stay quiet, to keep the peace, or watched someone mistake your strength for permission, I'd really like to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from or what part of this story stayed with you the most. We share stories like this every day. Stories about boundaries, truth, and the moments that change us. So if you don't want to miss the next one, make sure you subscribe and stay with us. We're walking this road together.